Hello friends, this is your friend back with a new fanfic. What if Naruto lost his memories and met Morgiana, Kairi, Xion, Aqua and Rory? Episode 1. If you like this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Now, after a mysterious incident erases every memory of his past, Naruto awakens in an unfamiliar world surrounded by strangers who may hold the key to his true identity. Now, let's start. Laughter and cheerful voices. This is what surrounded the young boy as he laid in the grass on the hilltop, resting under a cherry blossom tree. Hearing his name being called out, Naruto sat up and looked to where the voices came from. Seeing 5 bodies running towards them, all female. A blur of pink, blue, red, and black hair was all he could make out as they drew near. Giggling and laughing as they playfully pushed each other back to reach him first. Chan, 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 Chan. He cheerfully called out to them as he stood up to greet the approaching girls. Though as they drew near, their faces became more and more blurry, making it so he couldn't make out what they looked like. However, he was still overjoyed to see them as the pink-haired girl had won the impromptu race between the 5 girls, wrapping her arms around his neck as she planted a kiss on his lips. No fair, Chan. The red-headed girl shouted. You cheated. I did not, Chan. The pink-haired girl that had just kissed Naruto responded. We agreed that there were no rules. Which you took complete advantage of with your wind affinity. The blue-haired girl stated as she reached the group. At any rate, your mother has sent us to tell you that tomorrow she will officially announce our engagement to you, Naruto-kun. I'm so excited, Naruto-kun. A girl with long black hair exclaimed as she pounced upon the young blonde boy. Me too. A second girl with short black hair spoke up as she reached the group, panting slightly. Not being as physical as the other girls. Yup. And after we come of age, we'll all be married to Naruto-kun. The pink-haired girl exclaimed as she brought Naruto and the other girls into a large hug filled with warmth and joy, prompting the entire group to laugh. Here, I made these for all of you. Naruto smiled as he reached into his pocket and pulled out 5 separate necklaces with silver chains, and a bluish-green crystal. Handing one to each of the girls in front of him. It's beautiful, Naruto-kun. The red-haired girl exclaimed as she cradled the necklace in her hands. I agree, it is quite charming that you made these. The blue-haired girl stated as she held her own necklace. I love it. The girl with short black hair exclaimed as she hugged the necklace. As expected from my destined one. The long black-haired girl replied. Yup, I wanted to make one for each of you to signify our bond together. Naruto smiled as the crystal of each of the necklaces glowed brightly. So that when things get dark, our love will glow brighter to light up the darkness. We love you, Naruto-kun. The 5 girls exclaimed as they brought the blonde boy into another hug. I love you girls too. He smiled. My homes. Come on, Sama is waiting for us. The blue-haired girl stated, prompting the small group of young lovers to chuckle and laugh as they took off in another impromptu race. Real world. Slowly, he opened his eyes and stared up at the morning sky as clouds slowly drifted overhead. Birds chirping and singing to greet the day. With a groan, he sat up and rubbed the sleep out of his eyes, noting that he had ended up crying while he slept. That dream again. He mentally sighed, reaching down and taking hold of the necklace he wore of the same design of the ones that he gave to the girls, his princesses, in his dream. Receiving a sense of comfort from it. I've been having that dream every night for as long as I can remember. It has to mean something, but what? You know, you shouldn't sleep outside. A soft voice sounded from just behind him, off to the left. Turning his head, he could make out a feminine-like figure wearing a pink kimono. You could catch a cold. Never been sick before. Naruto replied as he got up and stretched. The name's Naruto, by the way. Haku, a pleasure to meet you, Naruto-san. The now identified Haku greeted. So, Why were you sleeping out in this field? Bit of a disagreement with a snot-nosed, spoiled brat. The blonde replied with a snort, thinking back of the previous night when the bridge builder's grandson ranted that they knew nothing of suffering. Naruto had had enough and verbally lashed out at the kid, telling Inari bluntly that many have suffered far more than he ever had, and that the kid should be thankful he still has a family that loves him, all before storming out of the house. I mean, I understand he has lost someone close to him. Naruto continued, missing the somber frown that showed on Haku's face. But to assume that no one has suffered more than him. The kid didn't have to worry about the villagers of the village he lived in gathering to beat him within an inch of his life. To torture him for crimes he never committed, and other reasons unknown to the blonde. Another thing Inari didn't have to worry about was when he was going to get his next meal. Sure, things were tight in the waves right now, but the tsunami always made sure there was food on the table. Naruto on the other hand had spent countless weeks rummaging in garbage bins, just looking for something decent enough to sat his hunger. Life can be cruel to good people. Haku commented with a sense of understanding. Why were you crying? Were you having a nightmare? No, not a nightmare. Nightmares are filled with fear, pain, and horror. Naruto replied with a frown before looking down at his necklace, firmly grasping it once more as he closed his eyes. I don't know what it was. It was filled with laughter and joy. Sounds like a pleasant dream, so why the tears? There were 5 girls. Naruto smiled slightly as he recalled the dream that had plagued every single night he could recall. Though from the corner of his eye, he could see a teasing smile on Haku's face, but ignored it. I couldn't make out their faces, or hear their names. I could only make out their hair color and voices. But I know they were dear to me. The black-haired teen could only frown at this. It sounded like someone had messed with this poor boy's memories. Removing large chunks of the boy's memories, no doubt from his early childhood. It made the young teen wonder what the person responsible for this was hiding. Maybe it's a sign of what's to come, Naruto-san. Haku smiled, reassuring the boy. I highly doubt it, unless I suddenly de-age by about 6 years. Naruto chuckled. Then perhaps it was a long-repressed memory. Maybe. He frowned, not liking the implication of it. Though he couldn't argue with it either. Since everything before he was 7 years old was blank. He had asked the old man Hokage about this, and was told that when he was younger, Naruto had fallen from a great height during one of his pranks and hit his head. He never really dwelt much on it, simply accepting what the man whom he saw as a grandfather figure had told him, as the truth. Another reason the young blonde didn't ponder such things was due to the burning sensation that he would feel on the back of his neck. Though it felt like it was coming from inside of his body, causing him an immense amount of pain. Almost to the point he would pass out. That headband, are you a shinobi, Naruto-san? Haku asked, snapping the young blonde out of his thoughts. Yup. He smiled, adjusting his forehead protector. You must train hard then. I have to, if I want to be the Hokage of my village. The blonde replied with his trademark, foxy grin. That way, all the people who look down on me and treat me like dirt will have to acknowledge me. Haku could only chuckle at the boy's drive. Also, I have to fulfill a promise to someone. He added. Tell me, do you have someone precious? Haku inquired, as he continued to pick herbs and place them in the basket. Naruto had to think about that for a moment, as his right hand went immediately to the necklace he wore as a dull pain flared up in the back of his mind. There were only a select handful of people in Konoha he actually cherished and would go to great lengths to earn their approval. The first and foremost being his GG, followed closely by Anko, an eccentric and sadistic woman just a few years older than him that he viewed as an older sister, and finally Iruka-sensei along with the father and daughter duo at his favorite ramen stand. I suppose I do, even if there are not many. The blonde replied. That is good. Haku smiled. When you protect someone truly precious to you, that is when you become your strongest. Once again, at the words, someone truly precious, Naruto's hand once again found itself wrapping around his necklace, and once again, a dull pain in the back of his mind flared up, causing the blonde to grunt slightly, bringing his hand up to his head to attempt to ease the pain. I agree. The blonde finally answered after the pain subsided, putting on a fake smile to hide his pain. I will train harder to protect those precious to me. Good. The black-haired teen replied as he stood up with the basket now full of healing herbs. Get stronger, I know we will meet again. Right. Naruto smiled, as he watched Haku leave the clearing they were in. Feeling a bit more relieved due to having someone to actually talk to about the dreams he had been having. Oh, by the way, Haku paused. I'm a boy. What? Naruto mentally screamed as his mouth hung open in shock at the revelation. He looks prettier than Sakura-chan. As for the young black-haired boy, he couldn't help but chuckle to himself at the blonde's reaction to his revelation. Though it was short-lived as another black-haired youth entered the clearing, the blonde's teammate, Sasuke Uchiha. Remaining silent, Haku walked past the Uchiha boy without a second glance and disappeared into the trees. Though Haku couldn't help but feel sorry for the young blonde. Someone had really messed with the poor boy's memories. He was more than willing to bet that the blonde's dream was exactly what he said it was. A repressed memory of an event dearly important to him. 1 week later. Where did he disappear this time? Kakashi sighed as he stared at the empty futon that Naruto had been using during their stay at the bridge builder's house. The silver-haired Jonin had noticed a change in the young blonde's demeanor ever since he disappeared the night he stormed out of the house after the confrontation with the bridge builder's grandson. Over the last week, Naruto wasn't as loud or boisterous as he had been the past few years. Oftentimes he would find the young blonde on the docks staring out over the water as he would stroke the necklace the blonde never took off. Even reducing how much he would ask Sakura out on a date, which while putting the pink-haired girl into an off mood. On one hand, the pinkette was happy that the blonde had seemingly given up on her. On the other hand, she would feel like something was missing due to the blonde's absence. Better go find him before he gets himself into trouble. Kakashi thought out loud as he turned and hobbled down the stairs, still not fully healed from his ordeal from his previous battle with Zabuza. Kakashi-sensei. The sole female genin called out as she ran up to him. Have you seen Sasuke-kun? He left just after breakfast to go by train. He answered with a frown, since she would have known that if she hadn't spent an hour and a half in the bathroom trying to make herself look good for the last Uchiha. While Sakura was book smart, had perfect chakra control, and was top kunoichi of her class, she was a fangirl for the raven-haired boy and it severely hampered her focus on her career as a kunoichi. Oh. She replied sheepishly. I was about to go out and look for Naruto. That baka run off again. The pinkette huffed, crossing her arms. I bet he is just doing it to get attention. I doubt it. Kakashi frowned as he left the house with the pinkette in tow. Perhaps the weight of his first mission outside of the village is hitting him and making him realize that being a shinobi is about a lot more than personal gratification and fame. Sakura frowned at this, getting the feeling that her sensei's words were also directed at her as well, but remained silent. After nearly 15 minutes of scouting the wooded area behind the house, they were alerted to the blonde's location when a kunai landed a few feet in front of them, prompting them to look up. Finding Naruto sitting on a branch near the top of the tree. Gash could be seen cut deeply into the tree's trunk, marking the progress the young teen had accomplished during his night-long training. Morning, Kakashi-sensei, Sakura. The blonde greeted, looking down at the two. Earning a frown from the pinkette due to the lack of chan suffix that the young teen usually attached to her name. Naruto was able to tree walk that high. Sakura thought to herself, clearly amazed that he was able to accomplish such a feat. Meanwhile, Kakashi had other thoughts. It took him just under a week to master the tree-walking exercise. The silver-haired Jonin thought to himself as he observed the slashes going up the tree trunk. Not too fast, but also not too slow to be completely left behind. Hokage-sama will be pleased. Come on down, Naruto. He finally called up. With a small sigh, the blonde pushed himself up and moved to step down only to slip, causing those below to cry out in surprise before he attacked both feet to the underside of the branch. A shit-eating grin adorning his face. Ha! He exclaimed, looking down at them. I got you. Deciding to not try his luck and ruin a good prank, he continued his trek down the tree trunk before landing firmly. Though he could see neither his sensei, nor his pink-haired teammate were amused by his prank. Kakashi glared at him with narrowed eyes in disapproval, and Sakura was clenching her fists in anger at the blonde's actions. Naruto. She screeched. You idiot. You could have died if you fell from that height. Like you would care. Naruto scoffed as he walked past a now shocked Sakura. It may have been callous for the blonde teen to say such a thing, but after his talk with Haku, he really began to reflect on how those around him perceived him. He really could only count on a very small number of people within the village that would truly mourn him, should such an event befall him. His current team was not among them. Sakura for one had made it very clear that the pink-haired girl cared very little for anyone who was not named Sasuke Uchiha. Not to mention her constant physical abuse towards him. Lashing out at him for even the smallest of things, some of which he had nothing to do with and just had the misfortune of being in the general area of her. And don't even get the blonde started on his raven-haired teammate. The Prince of Konoha, himself, Sasuke Uchiha. Due to nearly the entire village worshipping the very ground the last Uchiha walked on, the raven-haired teen had grown a superiority complex and an ego to match. Looking down on anyone, regardless of their rank within the village. Throughout the first few months of doing nothing but D-rank missions, Sasuke had repeatedly complained about doing what he dubbed servant work, doing as little as possible while pushing a majority of the work off onto Naruto. Lastly, there was their Jonin sensei, Kakashi Hatake. At best, the lazy Jonin could be described as that, lazy. Though Naruto did have to concede that at least Kakashi was impartial when it came to him, but almost to a neglectful level as the masked Jonin had almost immediately shown favoritism towards the Uchiha. Naruto, that was uncalled for. Kakashi chastised, earning another scoff from the blonde. You know it's true, Kakashi-sensei. Not a damn person will give a damn if I die. He responded without even looking back at his Jonin-sensei. Hell, I bet half the village would celebrate my death. Kakashi could only frown as the blonde made his way towards the house, while Sakura was shocked to receive such coldness from the blonde who had no crush on her. However, what really caught her off guard was how sure he sounded when he said the village would celebrate his death. Like he fully believed that the village would celebrate his death. As the two watched the blonde disappear into the trees towards the house, Sakura turned to Kakashi, as if to ask her sensei about what had just happened. As long as she had known the blonde knucklehead, she had never seen him act so melancholy before. He was always loud, obnoxious, and well, annoying. What was that all about? She asked. Like I said earlier, Naruto is feeling the full weight of what it means to be a shinobi. As such, he has probably done away with any misconception of how people feel about him, no matter how misguided his feelings are. Was all the silver-haired Jonin replied with the usual bored tone. Though on the inside, he was worried about the blonde genin. Not necessarily for his welfare, but the security of the village. I should report this to the Hokage as well. It won't do Konoha any good if our weapon is mentally broken. He mentally sighed as he pulled out his trademark orange book. I'll check the seals tonight, just to make sure they are still holding. On the other hand, Sakura felt a twinge of guilt. Knowing she was responsible for at least half of the reasons her blonde teammate felt the way he did. Sure, she didn't really try to get to know him, nor did she really pay attention to his introduction when they first became a team, but she really didn't want him to think she wouldn't care if he died. Perhaps we should at least try to get to know him a bit more. Inner Sakura offered, picking up on her outer self's dilemma. I guess, I really don't want him to feel like no one will care if he died. The Pinkett frowned, though content in her decision to try and get to know her blonde teammate better. Great bridge battle, 1 week later. Naruto could only watch in shock and horror at the scene that played out in front of him. The blonde had arrived late, having slept in due to training late into the night the previous evening, only to be woken up by Tsunami screaming as two of Gato's thugs had arrived at the house to kidnap the bridge builder's daughter to hold her as ransom to ensure the old man's surrender, and to perhaps use the poor girl for other means of entertainment. To complicate matters further, Inari had rushed to save his mother, nearly getting himself killed had the blonde teen not acted. Wasting no time, Naruto had quickly subdued the two goons and tied them up to ensure they didn't escape before joining the rest of his team at the bridge. Now, he could only stare as the body of Haku fell lifelessly to the cold hard concrete of the bridge. Finally being overwhelmed by the sheer amount of numbers of Gato's thugs. The fat, greedy man had decided to double-cross Zabuza and Haku to prevent them from paying the two missing nin. Zabuza fell soon after, unable to overcome the remaining numbers, despite fighting like a demon and dispatching a fair chunk. Having already been previously severely injured from his fight with Kakashi. The two biggest obstacles out of his way, Gato began to instruct what was left of his army of goons to dispose of the males, and capture the females to be broken in later before selling them off. Hearing this, something deep within the blonde had snapped as red chakra began to surge around his body. Being barely aware of his surroundings as rage consumed him, he heard what sounded like two popping sounds that came from the base of his neck. Releasing a primal roar, Naruto charged forth with reckless abandon. Using the red chakra swirling around him to tear through the remaining thugs, who were now trying to run over each other to escape the raging blonde. His once blue eyes now red with black slit pupils, giving the blonde teen a truly demonic look. Many had attempted to beg for mercy, but their cries fell upon deaf ears as the blonde genin slaked the bridge with their blood. Gato stood frozen in fear where he stood. Unable to move or cry out as he watched his men get massacred by one boy. A boy who now stood before him, glaring down on the pudgy man with contempt and fury. Please. Gato fell to his knees. I'll give you anything yo-urk. He never got to finish as the red chakra swirled around him and ripped him apart, throwing his severed limbs in all directions. Once done, Naruto turned to look towards the remaining conscious members of his team before bending over and clutching his head in pain before his eyes rolled back into his head and he collapsed on the ground. What just happened, Kakashi-sensei? Sakura stammered. I don't know. Kakashi replied, keeping his Sharingan active as he cautiously approached the still form of Naruto. Not noticing the subtle glow on the back of the young blonde's neck. Naruto's mindscape. Slowly, Naruto opened his eyes to take in his surroundings. Sitting up, his hand went directly to his necklace, ensuring it was still there. Letting out a sigh of relief upon finding it, he looked around. Craning his head slightly, he could see a large gate behind him. What the hell happened to this place? He asked out loud as he stood up and walked towards the large set of bars. You kidnapped Kit. A voice boomed from behind the bars, as a pair of large eyes opened and peered down at the boy. Kurama. Good to see you finally remember, Kit. The large being replied as it moved into the light, exposing the head of a large fox. I've been trying to break that damn seal for years with the one memory I was able to save before it was sealed away as well. The dream. Naruto realized. Morgiana-chan, Rory-chan, Kairi-chan, Aqua-chan, and Xion-chan. My Himes. Slowly, the young blonde slumped down against the bars of the cage. Not the least bit afraid of the massive beast it held. Grasping his necklace as he was finally able to fully remember his girls' faces. Their smiles. The way their eyes would light up when they saw him. As such, tears began to stream down his face. Hitting him even harder, was remembering his mother's face, and above all, her smile. Ka-san. He whispered. Kit. Kurama sighed as he extended part of his tail through the bars to comfort his host. We need to talk. A young girl with red hair and ocean blue eyes, no older than 14, stood on the cliff face, overlooking the water crashing into the shore. Staring out over the open ocean as tears stained her cheeks as she clutched a photo in her right hand. The photo in question showed her and 4 other girls, all surrounding a single blonde-haired boy with distinctive whisker marks on his cheeks, who had a large smile on his face. All 5 had managed to sneak a kiss on the blonde boy's cheeks just as the photo was taken. Morgiana and Rory on the boy's left, and Aqua, Xion, and herself on the right side. The photo itself was worn, and faded in some areas, littered with watermarks from when she would cry over it. Please, be safe, Naruto-kun. Kairi silently prayed, closing her eyes as she clutched the photo, a lone tear escaping her eye. Kami, if you're listening. Please, please allow us to be reunited. For all of us, and especially Kushina-sama. It had been just over 7 years since Naruto was taken away from them, and while she and the rest of the girls did their best to meet each day like normal, it just felt like their light was gone. The way he would smile and laugh always warmed their hearts and brought them joy. Over the years, Kairi had filled out nicely, growing into an attractive young woman with a slender athletic body. She had abandoned the dresses she once wore as a child, in favor of pink and black bicycle shorts, with a matching hooded sleeveless vest that exposed just enough of her developing cleavage, along with a black pair of kunoichi sandals. Letting out a sad sigh, she turned from her spot on the cliff face and began to make her trek back towards where the others were gathered. It was then that she felt a very familiar chakra source erupting from the southwest, prompting her to look in that direction. Her heart swells with hope from feeling the familiar chakra source. Kurama-sama, Naruto-kun. In the blink of an eye, the red-haired teen disappeared in a water shunshin. Not even a full minute later, Kairi arrived in one of the village's many parks, where the others had gathered. Did you feel it? She asked, a tone of excitement, and above all, hope, in her voice. We did. Xion commented, earning nods from the others. Like Kairi, Xion had filled out nicely over the past 7 years. Her hair had only grown out slightly as she insisted on keeping it short, though her bangs now covered one of her beautiful golden yellow eyes. Aside from that, she sported her usual black hooded cloak that hid her standard Anbu-style gear that she wore. A simple black pair of shorts, and sleeveless vest, along with a pair of knee-high kunoichi combat sandals. Also like her red-haired friend, Xion had gained a more athletic body due to all her training. No doubt about it, that was Kurama-sama's chakra signature. The pink-haired teen Morgiana stated. Her pink eyes sparkling with a life not seen in them for nearly 7 years. Of the 5 girls, Morgiana had grown the most, especially in her chest area, giving her a rather large bust for her age. Aside from that, she had trained rigorously throughout the years, specializing in taijutsu and adding her wind affinity into her style. Though her fashion style had not changed much over the years, still wearing her white battle dress with an orange cinch tied around her waist, and a simple pair of white shorts underneath, accompanied with a pair of brown kunoichi sandals. Rory, who was leaning against her halberd-like weapon, merely silently nodded in agreement with her pink-haired friend. A sense of excitement bubbling up inside her, as well as hope. Hope that she and her other soon-to-be sister wives would be reunited with their loved one. Like the others, she had grown into a beautiful and deadly young woman over the years, earning the nickname of Rory the Reaper. her long black hair flowing in the breeze while her piercing red eyes took in everything around her. Her outfit was unique among her soon-to-be sister wives. Sporting a black gothic Lolita-like dress with red trimmings. Though the bottom half was a combination of a pair of shorts woven into the dress. A large bow adorned the top of her head, giving her the appearance of having fox-like ears. To finish off her outfit, she wore a black pairing of stockings that stopped halfway up her thighs, and a pair of red shinobi combat boots. We should report to Kushina-sama. Aqua suggested, with the others quickly agreeing. She would have no doubt felt it as well. With blue hair and equally blue eyes, Aqua had matured greatly over the years. Usually being the pillar of strength for the others after Naruto's disappearance. Remaining calm and collected in even the most dire of situations, becoming the voice of reason for the group. Sporting a purplish-black high-collared halter top with two pink intersecting belts crossing over the center of her chest and a pair of black shorts. A pair of black stockings that stop halfway up her thigh and a black pair of shinobi combat boots round out her outfit. With one final nod in agreement, each of the 5 girls disappeared in their signature shunshin technique. Kara once again disappeared in a swirl of water. Xion, in a flash of lightning. Rory in a swirl of fire. Aqua in a mist of snow, and finally Morgiana in a gust of wind. Baruchage Tower. So you all felt it as well. The red-haired woman spoke as she gazed out the window that overlooked a good portion of the village she now led before finally turning to look at the 5 girls who were now kneeling before her, prompting the red-haired woman to roll her eyes. I told you 5 you don't have to do that. I'm going to be your mother-in-law, Databane. Sorry, Kushina-sam. Xion was cut off by another glare from the red-haired woman. Anyways, Aqua interrupted, catching the Baruchage's attention. We felt the chakra signature coming from the southwest. Right, Kushina turned her attention to a large map that was spread out over the desk. Upon feeling the Kyuubi's chakra signature, the red-haired woman knew the 5 girls would soon arrive and had prepared accordingly. And according to the map, the most likely place it could have originated from is Wave Country. As if to emphasize her point, Kushina had made a line with her finger from the location of the island their village was on, and dragged her finger down diagonally, until it reached where the small island known as Wave was located. We're going to go find him and bring him home, right? Morgiana inquired, which prompted the other 4 teens to look expectantly towards the Baruchage. Kushina sighed, before addressing the 5. Your mission is to go to Wave, talk to the villagers there and get what information you can. Afterwards, you are to return here to report your findings, no matter how bad they may be. Kushina instructed, receiving a nod from each of the girls in front of her. However, I stress that you keep your hopes tempered. My Sochi may not be there when you arrive. But, if he is there, bring him home. Understood, Kushina-sama. Kara replied with a small bow of her head, prompting the others to do the same. You leave early tomorrow. The redhead village leader stated. Now, go and pack and prepare yourselves. Bidding their goodbyes, the 5 departed the office to prepare for their mission. A mixture of excitement, hope, and a little bit of fear simmering between all of them. Leaving the red-haired woman alone, who finally collapsed in her chair and laid her head down on the desk. A lone tear escaping her eye. Please, be safe in Sochi and come back home, please. She silently prayed, lifting her head up to gaze out over the village once more from his desk. Wave Country. The young blonde teen stood silently over 2 marked graves, one of which was identified with a mask, and the other with a massive sword being used as a gravestone. Saying a silent prayer in hopes that the 2 fallen shinobi would find what they desired in the afterlife. Reluctantly, Kakashi had allowed him to give the 2 a proper burial, using their personal items as grave markers. Sasuke had scoffed at the concept of honoring a fallen enemy whilst Sakura had remained uncharacteristically silent the past few days. The pink-haired girl had even halted her advances towards the raven-haired emo, much to the entire team's surprise. Though even more surprising for Naruto was that she appeared to be watching him silently from a distance, a look of concern etched on her face. This of course only made the young blonde even more apprehensive of her, not trusting her intentions. He had been lured in by false concern in the past when he was only 10 years old. A mistake that had nearly cost him his life. Then there was his sensei, Kakashi. After the incident in the forest, the masked pervert had snuck over to his cot while he was sleeping, ensuring the seals were still present on the young blonde's neck. Of course at the time, they were still active. However, after the fight on the bridge, the silver-haired Jonin had checked once more, only to find that once again, the seals were still present. Unknown to him, the seals on Naruto were now fake and merely simulated the effects, even able to fool the Sharingan, and possibly even a Byakugan. Leaving Kakashi unaware that the young blonde had overpowered the seals, and had now gained back all of his memories. Naruto had to hand it to Kurama, the fox had faked the seals perfectly. Now it was just up to him to keep up the act. Though he mentally shuddered about proclaiming about being Hokage and acting like a complete fool. Though, perhaps he could use this mission as an excuse to tone it down a little. After all, he had just taken his first life on the first mission outside of the village. The old monkey surely would expect some mental change after that, right? Of course, all of this made the young blonde recall his discussion with Kurama after he had passed out on the bridge. Flashback no jutsu. It seemed like hours had passed before Naruto had finally calmed down enough to talk to the large fox. Though in reality, it had only been around half an hour. Though during that time the blonde was conflicted with himself. Naruto had felt like he had abandoned his girls, and his mother, despite not really having a choice in the matter. How are you holding up the kit? Kurama asked, after minutes of silence had passed between the two. I don't know, Kurama. He finally answered after a handful of seconds. I'm still trying to wrap my mind around how this could have happened. The large fox sighed as he laid his massive head down near the cage doors. He knew his blonde host was not going to like the answer, but the boy deserved to know the truth. He just hoped Naruto wouldn't act too irrationally. In short, we were betrayed. Kurama began with another sigh. You were trusted alone with the bastard, Kakashi, that night. He lured you into an isolated training field under the promise of teaching you one of your father's techniques. And he slapped a seal on the back of my neck instead. Naruto growled, remembering the events of that night. Yeah. Except I know he didn't make the seal. The fox started with narrowed eyes. That seal was from a Fuinjutsu Grand Master, and there is only one who would be stupid enough to invoke your mother's wrath. That perverted bastard. The blonde clenched his fists before slamming them down into the water in anger. It was bad enough with him perving on my hymes, but to betray my mother and father like that. I'll rip his balls off and shove them down his throat. You'll be lucky to get a chance once your mother finds out. Kurama laughed as he imagined the horror the red-haired woman would unleash upon the perverted toad sage. She wasn't called the Crimson Death for nothing. This of course earned a small chuckle from the blonde. Like the large fox behind him, he was imagining different scenarios his mother would put the old fool through. So what now? Naruto finally asked. Once that masked bastard realizes the seals are broken, he will just subdue me again and have them reapplied. O ye of little faith, Kit. Kurama laughed, before he continued with a short explanation. As soon as they broke, I placed false ones in their place. They will simulate the same chakra pattern and action. Also, now that I am aware of their intentions, I can block further seals from working as they should. So that means, you're free from the seals, Kit. The fox smiled. However, it will be up to you to maintain the illusion until we can escape this cesspool of a village. Naruto merely nodded, understanding what his partner was saying. Even though he had his memories back as well as the old lessons his mother and others had taught him, he couldn't tip his hand. He would have to maintain the illusion he was still an idiot. Well, Naruto smiled as he stood up and turned to look towards the large fox. I am sure with these traumatic events on this mission, I am expected to tone it down a little. Perhaps Kit. Kurama chuckled. Just try and find a balance so you don't attract too much unwanted attention. Agreed. The blonde nodded before looking around his mindscape once more, before shaking his head in disgust. But first, let's take care of this place. Closing his eyes, he began to focus on his surroundings. Allowing the sewer system to fade away, soon to be replaced with a large forested area, complete with a meadow clearing and a babbling brook cutting through the center of it all. Off in the distance, a large waterfall could be seen pouring into a large lake that the brook was connected to. For added measure, the young blonde also added an assortment of wildlife to his new mindscape, similar to how he had it structured before he was kidnapped. There we go, much better. Naruto smiled, turning to his companion who was no longer trapped behind the cage. A collar hanging firmly around his neck to act as the seal. Thanks Kit, I really missed this place. The large fox smiled as he took in his new, yet familiar surroundings. No, thank you Kurama. The blonde gave a soft smile. Even if I didn't know it at the time, that dream I had every night gave me hope that things would get better. You're welcome Kit. Kurama smiled before it turned into a sadistic grin as he gazed at the blonde boy before him. Now, let's talk about training. Because you are severely out of practice with your skills, no thanks to that old monkey. A shiver ran down Naruto's spine, as he recalled the fox's training regiment. Knowing full well he was in for a world of pain and suffering for the immediate future. Still, he would meet it head on and get stronger. So that one day, he would reunite with his home and his mother. Flashback no justice dispel. Naruto was taken out of his reminiscing when he felt a lone chakra signature behind him. Letting out a soft sigh, he kept quiet until his pink-haired teammate reached where he stood. No need to let others know of his sensory capabilities. Though he frowned slightly as he felt her primary emotion was concern. Did you know them? Sakura asked as she stood next to him, looking down at the graves. Though she mentally wanted to slap herself for asking such a ridiculous question. Actually, I only met Haku 2 weeks ago, when I slept outside. The blonde replied, though in a solemn tone, seeing no reason to hide his meeting with the ice user. Though at the time, I didn't know he worked with Zabuza. The pinkett was about to inquire further, but was shaken from her thoughts when she heard the blonde next to her chuckle. Seeing her look of confusion, the Jinchuriki decided to let her in on what he found funny. I was just remembering when I first met Haku. He chuckled again. I actually thought he was a girl, because of how cute he looked. Sakura couldn't help but giggle as she imagined it. Though it did help validate the blonde's story when she recalled that Sasuke commented on Naruto talking with a girl out in the woods, so it appeared the look even fooled Sasuke. So, how are you holding up, after, you know? She tentatively asked. Why do you care, Sakura? The blonde asked, causing the pinkett to flinch slightly at his tone. Also feeling a slight pain in her chest at the lack of the usual chan suffix that had once accompanied her name. Look, I'm sorry. She sighed, knowing what she had to do. She and her inner self had had a long discussion and reflected on their past interactions with the blonde, and realized just why the boy felt the way he did, and they were to blame for it, partially. I know I gave you the impression that I don't care about you, and I've been a complete bitch towards you. Naruto's eyes widened slightly at her words. Is she really? I think she is Kit. I feel actual sincerity in her words. Kurama replied. Despite that, I would care if something happened to you. The pinkett continued. And I am sure there are those in the village that would as well. Very few would. Naruto replied automatically, causing Sakura to frown slightly. And one of them wouldn't be for the reasons she thinks. And anyways, Kakashi-sensei wanted me to tell you that we will be returning back to the village in 2 days, once the bridge is finished. Sakura stated and turned to leave the blonde-haired genin alone. Though the Pinkett was a little disheartened that the discussion didn't carry on for as long as she had hoped it would. She truly did want to make an effort to actually get to know him, instead of just ignoring him like she had in the past. Thank you, Sakura. Naruto finally spoke, though not turning to face her. Hearing this, a small smile formed on the Pinkett's face before she ran off to rejoin her sensei, and perhaps ask Sasuke for a date once they got back to the village. Konoha. 4 days later. Kakashi let out a quiet sigh as he thought of the report he was going to have to deliver to the Hokage. First and foremost was the events surrounding the Jinchuriki. In between the blonde's shift in attitude during the tree-walking incident, which had affected his pink-haired student. He had checked the seals that night, and was relieved to find them still in place, which only reaffirmed his earlier excuse to Sakura that the stress of the Jinchuriki's first mission outside the village had forced him to reevaluate certain aspects in his life. Of course, the villagers, with the way the villagers had treated the boy, the masked Jonin wasn't surprised that the blonde was finally starting to take a more cynical outlook on those around him. However, it needed to be curbed a little so the boy would remain docile and loyal to the village. At least there were a few that genuinely treated the boy well. Like the father and daughter duo at the ramen stand, Uruka, and the Tokubetsu Jonin, Anko. Kakashi still didn't know how those two met, but didn't care as the Hokage didn't deem it a threat to the weapon's development. That led to the Jonin's next problem. The incident on the bridge when Naruto had tapped into the fox's power and slaughtered Gato and his men after they had killed Zabuza and his little helper. No doubt the realization of taking a life still weighed heavy on the boy's mind, as he had barely said a word the entire trip back, having nearly completely ignored Sakura, only giving her short replies when the pink-haired genin would attempt to start a conversation with him. This was troubling to Kakashi, as it showed that the blonde had all but given up on his crush on the girl, which threw a wrench into the masked Jonin's plan to utilize his feelings for her to manipulate him further towards Hokage's goal of turning the blonde into the village's weapon, once he was broken enough into a form of submission and loyalty towards the village. You three are dismissed, Kakashi stated after his team and himself arrived inside the village. I'll report the mission's success to the Hokage. Hi Kakashi-sensei. 2 of them replied, while the third merely nodded and slowly began to make his way towards his apartment. Meanwhile, Sakura was torn on what to do. As both boys on her team had split off into different directions, forcing her to have to choose. Should she follow her crush and obsession in hopes of getting a date with the last Uchiha, or should she make good on her promise and try to talk with Naruto more? Frowning slightly, she reached her decision and walked in the same direction Naruto did. Kakashi had noticed this, but said nothing. If she inadvertently reignites the crush he once had on her, it would be all the better and would make him easier to manipulate down the road with the lure of a relationship. Though in reality, the masked Jonin already knew the Hokage wouldn't allow any form of serious relationship to form with the boy until it was needed, and then they would just get a volunteer to become impregnated with the Jinchuriki's child to pass the Kyuubi to, once Naruto no longer had a purpose. Shrugging it off, he quickly made his way towards the Hokage's tower. It didn't take him long to arrive at the tower, jumping into the office through the window like he normally did when he had to report something. Immediately, Hiruzen looked up from his desk, setting his sights on the masked Jonin that now stood in front of him. Report Kakashi. The elder man ordered. Taking a deep breath, the silver-haired man began to relay his detailed report of what had transpired while on the mission. Sakura. The pink-haired kunoichi couldn't help but feel a swell of anger as she followed her blonde-haired teammate. Initially, She had wanted to quickly reach him and try to talk some more, but her inner self had suggested hanging back. Which is the reason for her current mood. While tailing the blonde, she had noticed the glares sent the boys away by nearly every villager they had passed. Some even whisper to one another how Naruto should have died on his first mission outside the village. She had even overheard a select few bragging about beating the boy to near death when he was younger. Hearing this, the pinkett clenched her fist. He was right. Sakura mentally sighed. No one in the village would care if he died, and even more so, they would celebrate his death. But why? I don't know. Inner Sakura replied with a frown of her own. But I don't like this. Their words, what they're saying is just horrible. There has to be some that would miss him, right? The pinkett thought with a frown. Though as she thought back, she realized that literally everyone in their graduating class had constantly made fun of the blonde and at one point or another, had bullied him. The only exception being the shy Hyuga heiress. Snapping out of her thoughts, she noticed the blonde teen had been stopped by a slightly older woman with purple hair tied into a fanned ponytail, dressed in a tan trench coat, and a full-body mesh outfit, accompanied with an orange skirt. Sakura couldn't help but frown slightly, not trusting the woman after overhearing what the other villagers had said. Thought was surprised when the woman's face went from happy and smiling, to shock and sadness as she brought the blonde into a hug and began to whisper things into her ear, which earned a nod from Naruto. I guess she is one of the ones who actually care for him. Inner Sakura pointed out. That's good, but still, out of everyone in this village, only one so far. Sakura sighed as she watched the purple-haired woman lead Naruto into a different direction. Frowning slightly, she decided that it would be no use to try and approach him now. Well, he did say he liked ramen. Her inner self reminded the pinkett. Maybe we should stop by there and see if we can find anything. With a new destination set, Sakura took off in the direction of Ichiraku's ramen. Perhaps tomorrow, she would be able to talk with her blonde teammate, now that she has a better perspective of what he has to go through on a daily basis. Hokage Tower. And that is what happened. Kakashi had finally finished his report. Having told Hiruzen every small detail. From Naruto's shift in attitude, to him snapping and killing all of Gato's men, as well as Gato himself on the bridge. You ensure the seals are still active, correct? Correct, Hokage-sama. The masked Jonin replied. After both incidents, the seals are still working perfectly. Good. Hiruzen sighed in relief. The last thing the old man needed was the village's weapon to regain his memories. Even worse would be if Kushina had found out where her missing son had been all these years. What should we do about his change of attitude and him taking his first life? Kakashi inquired. Nothing for now. The elderly man responded. I believe you are correct in your assessment about the boy. If anything, it is better if he becomes more cynical, as the weapon will be less hesitant to kill when commanded to do so. And of his views of the villagers celebrating his death. All according to plan, it will make him feel grateful that he is allowed to live. Hiruzen replied, taking a puff from his pipe. Still, do what you can to downplay it. Of course, Hokage-sama. The silver-haired Jonin answered. I will do my best. However, for the next couple of months, I will not be assigning your team any more missions outside the village. Hiruzen stated. Mostly to avoid any further incidents for the time being. The last thing we need is for Kushina to learn that we have Naruto. Kakashi couldn't help but shudder at the thought. Should the woman discover that he had helped orchestrate her son's kidnapping, death would be a preferable fate over what that woman would inflict upon him. Understood, Hokage-sama. He gulped, earning a nod from the old man. For now, if your team has a week off, you are dismissed. Thank you, Hokage-sama. Kakashi bowed before disappearing into a leaf shunshin. Hopefully you have developed a taste for blood after your first kill, young Naruto-kun. Hiruzen darkly grinned at the thought. Because once you have fully submitted to me, I will turn your power towards your home village, making Konoha the strongest of all the hidden villages. Underscore. Wave Country. 2 days later. The 5 teenage girls had not been in the best of moods. Due to a small squall that had developed during their boat ride, they had been forced to dock on the mainland, and travel by foot to Wave Country, which had set them back by a day. However, once they arrived at the massive bridge, their mood had quickly dissipated, replaced with joy and happiness as they read the plaque that greeted travelers. The Great Naruto Bridge. He could actually be here. Kairi commented, tears forming in her eyes as she placed her hand over his name on the plaque. Come on, let's see if anyone knows anything. Morgiana stated, earning an agreeing nod from the girls. Quickly the 5 teens ran across the bridge with renewed speed. A small part of them held out hope that their blonde fiancé would still be within the village, so that they could take him back home. It didn't take long for the 5 to finish crossing the bridge, arriving inside a quaint-looking village with people happily bustling to and fro, as they went about their daily lives. Ah, welcome to Wave. A voice spoke up from behind them, prompting them to turn to the one speaking to them. Seeing an old bespectacled man with a large beard and dark eyes, wearing a sleeveless shirt, accompanied by a towel hanging loosely off his neck. Name's Tazuna. What can I do for you? Good afternoon, Tazuna-san. Aqua spoke up as she approached the elderly man, offering him a kind smile. We were hoping someone could help us. Depends on what you're asking, but I will do my best. Aqua. The blue-haired teen smiled before gesturing towards the other 4. And these are Kairi, Xion, Morgiana, and Rory. We come from Barukagir. That's a bit of a trip. Tazuna observed. Hell, if he had the money and the means, he would have hired a team of Baru shinobi, as the village was considered the strongest of them all. Though the old bridge builder was happy that things had turned out as well as they had, despite the initial setback. So what brings you to Wave? Well, Aqua began, but was interrupted by Kairi. Can you tell us about the bridge? The redhead inquired. You like it? The old man beamed. I built it myself. It is quite a piece of architecture. Xion smiled, seeing the old man proud of his accomplishment. Yup, though it would have never been completed if it wasn't for the Konoha shinobi. Tazuna commented, though at the word, Konoha, the girls narrowed their eyes just slightly. Already not liking the implications. Especially that blonde kid. Could you perhaps tell us more about the name of the bridge? Aqua ventured. You mean Naruto? The old bridge builder questioned, adopting a thinking pose as he struggled to remember the blonde's last name. Uzuka's, Uzumei. Uzumaki perhaps. Rory offered. That's it, Naruto Uzumaki. Tazuna smiled. Good boy, really helped our village reclaim our hope. That is why we named the bridge in his honor. Is he? Morgiana asked, fearing that the bridge was named after the blonde boy to honor his memory, due to falling in battle. No, he left with his team almost a week ago. The old man replied, not noticing the sigh of relief that seemed to echo amongst the girls. Did he look like this? Kairi inquired, offering the photo she always had with her. It's a bit old, though. Tazuna frowned as he took hold of the photo and narrowed his eyes. He could see the 5 girls in front of him all surrounding a younger version of the blonde teen that had helped their village so much and given hope to his grandson once more. The old bridge builder could clearly see the boy, along with the girls, were extremely happy the day of the photo. Not the lonely teen that had left no more than a week ago. Why don't we continue this conversation back at my house? The old man sighed, already seeing the writing on the wall. My daughter will also be able to answer your questions. Nodding, the 6 of them quietly made their way through the village until they reached a small house at the water's edge. Opening the door, he invited the 5 in, before entering behind them. Tsunami. He called out. I'm home, and we have guests. Coming. A feminine voice called out from the kitchen, before the owner of the voice stepped into view, Seeing the girls that had accompanied her father, she gave a polite bow and welcomed them to her home. These girls are looking for Naruto. Tazuna informed his daughter with a serious look in his eye. Oh, how come? The lunette inquired as she led the group into the dining room, waiting for each of them to claim a chair to sit in. Well, we're kind of his fiancés. Aqua chuckled, earning a surprised gasp from the bridge builder's daughter. With a nod of approval from Kairi, Tazuna passed the photo the redhead had given him to his daughter. As she gazed down at it, an expression of realization had washed over her face as she silently passed the photo back to the red-headed teen. 7 years ago, he was kidnapped from our village. Morgiana informed the father and daughter, causing the old man's eyes to narrow. Meanwhile, Tsunami bowed her head in acknowledgement. And with what we have learned, we now know who took him. Xion finished, with a slight scowl. Meanwhile, Rory was clenching and relaxing her fists in anger at what they had learned, with Morgiana adopting a similar train of thought and desire to go to Konoha and smash the village to pieces and bring back their lover. But why? Tsunami inquired. Why would Konoha kidnap him? Frowning, the 5 girls looked to one another, before Aqua let out a small sigh and looked the bridge builder's daughter in the eye. Naruto-kun is the Jinchuriki of the 9-tailed fox, Kyuubi. A being a great power, she explained. We can only surmise that Konoha wanted that power for themselves, despite Barugaker being allied with the village. Not for long, as soon as Kushina-sama finds out, she will want to declare war on them. Xion stated with a slight scoff, earning a nod of agreement among the girls. That explains what happened on the bridge. Tazuna commented, earning a curious look from the others, remembering that his daughter was unaware of what had transpired during the final battle. When Gato and his men showed up and killed the 2 that were working for him, Naruto seemed to snap. Having a red glow around him as he slaughtered the rest of Gato's thugs, and finally Gato himself. Hearing this, the girls gasped in surprise and in mourning. That their fiancé had to deal with his first kill alone. They could only hope that Kurama was able to comfort the blonde in their place. We should probably head back and inform Kushina-sama of what we discovered here. Morgiana offered as she stood up from the table. It's going to be dark soon. The Tsunami informed the pink-haired teen. Why don't you girls stay here the night, and head out first thing in the morning? That would be appreciated, Tsunami-san. Aqua replied. Very well. The brunette smiled. I will show you to the spare room. Barugaker, 2 days later. Did you find anything? Kushina asked as the 5 girls entered her office. We did, Kushina-sama. Xion answered. And you're not going to like it. What am I not going to like, Xion-chan? The red-haired Baruchage inquired, narrowing her eyes slightly, feeling a sense of anxiety swelling up inside her. Konoha has Naruto-kun. Rory blatantly stated with a scowl. What? It's true, Kushina-sama. Aqua sighed. When we arrived in Wave, we met an old bridge builder who had recently hired a team from Konoha. With that team was Naruto-kun. Slowly, the blue-haired teen relayed all that they had learned on their trip to Wave Country about Naruto. Neither of the women in the room could resist shedding a few tears that the blonde had to go through his first killing almost completely alone. Though the red-haired village leader was happy to hear that her son had a bridge named after him, to honor him. Did you learn who was on this team from Konoha? Kushina inquired. Yes ma'am. The blue-haired teen replied. It was Team 7, composed of Naruto-kun, Sasuke Uchiha, and Sakura Haruno. Led by Kakashi Hatake. At the Jonin-sensei's name, Kushina had shattered the corners of her desk where she was gripping it, causing the 5 girls to jump slightly. That bastard. She seethed. It was no coincidence that the masked Jonin was on the same team as her son, and did not recognize him. Not to mention, Kakashi was the last person to have seen Naruto before he disappeared that fateful night. It became clear that her late husband's former student had a hand in her son's kidnapping. What should we do, Kushina-sama? Kairi asked. We should go to Konoha, smash in their gates and bring our beloved back home. Rory exclaimed, slamming her halberd down, creating cracks in the floor. No. Kushina replayed in an eerily calm voice. Contrast to her actions just seconds before. But Kushina-sama, they have Naruto-kun. The long black-haired teen argued. I know, Rory-chan, I know. Kushina sighed as she sat back down. Next month, Konoha will be hosting the Chunin exams. You 5 will be entering. But we're already Chunin. Xion pointed out, confused at where her soon-to-be mother-in-law was going with this. Though their rank was in name only, as in terms of actual combat prowess and technique, they were all at least mid to high jonin. Konoha is unaware of your rank, so it is the perfect guise. Kushina stated. The main objective is going to be to find my Sochi. However, you must wait until you have entered the village and the situation. There is a small chance that the old bastard won't let Naruto-kun compete. Of course, Kushina-sama. Morgiana replied. We'll prepare for the exams and train hard to bring Naruto-kun back home with us. Very well. She smiled. I know this has been difficult, but soon, he will be back with us where he belongs, and Konoha will pay for their transgressions. One by one, the 5 girls departed the office to prepare for the next month. Aiming to train extra hard to ensure their blonde lover returns to their arms once more, and to never let go. Though Rory and Morgiana still hope to dish out some forms of revenge against the cesspool of a village. Sakura let out a sigh as she approached her team's usual training ground. It had been exactly 1 week since they had returned to the village from their first C-rank mission, which had turned into an A- rank, and throughout the entire week, she had been unable to even find Naruto at all. It was like he had completely disappeared into thin air. It was also concerning to her that her blonde teammate had not frequented the ramen stand either, which of course caused Ayame to worry as well. During the Pinket's week-long break, Sakura had begun to frequent the ramen stand more and more, somewhat breaking her diet after her initial visit to the stand the day they had returned to the village. However, now she could understand why her blonde teammate loved the stuff. Though what she had learned from the ramen waitress when she inquired about Naruto still haunted her dreams at night, as Ayame had reluctantly explained a rather brief history about the blonde boy. The nights her and her father would find him bloodied and beaten in an alleyway, left to die. For every year, for the past 6 years on the boy's birthday, she and her father would close down the shop and search the streets for the blonde. Each time dreading what condition they would find him in. To make matters worse, they had learned the hard way that they couldn't take him to the hospital due to a majority of the staff refusing to treat the boy, and those that did had used it as an excuse to inflict more pain on him. Thus, forcing the father and daughter duo to do what they could to treat his injuries in the back of their own stand. With great reluctance, Ayame had recounted how they had found Naruto crucified, burned, poisoned, and severely mutilated. Though for some reason, within a day or two, he was always back to full health with his goofy smile and loud attitude, proclaiming he was going to be the Hokage and force everyone to acknowledge him. I wonder where he has been all week. Sakura mentally asked herself. I don't know. Inner Sakura sighed. Perhaps we should go to where he lives. Good idea, Inner. The Pinkett mentally nodded, though frowned slightly when she realized she didn't know where Naruto lived. Only that it was somewhere in the red light district, which didn't really do much to reduce the search area. On the other hand, she knew exactly where Sasuke lived, even though it wasn't hard due to the raven-haired teen residing in his clan's compound still. Even further, she knew everywhere he would go, and at which times due to the last Uchiha falling into a standard routine each day. What the Pinkett had not yet realized was that throughout the entire week, she hadn't once sought out the source of her obsession, instead focusing solely on finding Naruto and hanging out with Ayame when her search would turn up nothing. Of course she couldn't say her week was not entirely uneventful, as a few days ago she had an uncomfortable confrontation with the purple-haired young woman who had greeted Naruto upon his return to the village. Flashback no jutsu. Sakura had let out another sigh as she had spent the last few hours wandering around the village in hopes of finding her blonde teammate. Turning up another fruitless search, she had opted to visit Ichiraku's again, in hopes the blonde would turn up there. Well, that was half of the reason. She had yet to admit it to herself, but she had immediately grown to love the ramen from the stand. Not paying attention to anything in general, the pinkett rounded the corner before feeling a slight pain at the base of her neck before her world turned black. Vaguely feeling someone pick her up and carrying her off into some unknown direction to her. Nearly half an hour later, did the young pinkett return to the world of the living, only to find herself tied to a tree out in the middle of the forest. Quickly snapping her eyes open, she frantically began to look around her surroundings in an attempt to get her bearings. Ah, you're finally awake. A feminine voice spoke up from just behind her, just enough that they remained out of sight. Where am I? She asked, only to receive a sadistic giggle. You're in my personal playground, Pinky. The voice replied, getting closer to her. What do you want? I want to know why you've been looking for my Naruto-kun. The purple-haired snake mistress stated, rounding the tree the girl was tied to and standing front of her. Playing with a kunai that she held in her hands. What? Was the pinkett's intelligent response. I didn't stutter, Pinky. Anko retorted, narrowing her eyes towards her prisoner. Why have you been looking for Naruto-kun? Aren't you supposed to be a fangirl for that duck emo? I want to be his friend. The pinkett replied in a soft voice as she hung her head, ignoring the jab at Sasuke. Though loud enough for the snake mistress to hear, causing to narrow her eyes even more. And why the change of heart? Anko inquired. As I recall, you were a bitch towards him throughout the entire academy, and even after you were put on a team together. Don't know why the Gaki had a crush on you, when he could have done so much better. Sakura could only wince at her words, and the coldness in her voice, as well as a slight pain in her chest when the snake mistress told her that Naruto could have done better than her, in terms of girls to be interested in and have a crush on. He doesn't have a crush on me anymore. She all but whispered in sadness as tears threatened to fall from her eyes. She didn't know why, but it hurt her to the core that she was no longer Sakura-chan to the blonde. Now, she was just simply Sakura. Good, maybe hope for the Gaki yet. Anko replied with no shame nor care if she hurt the pinkett's feelings. But that still doesn't answer my question, why the sudden change of heart? It was something he said to me during our mission. Sakura replied, lifting her head to look the snake mistress in the eye. And I want to prove him wrong. I want to show him that there are others who care for him. Silence hung between them as Anko stared back at the pink-haired girl. She had already known all of this from her talk with Naruto when she had taken him aside to comfort him about taking his first life, all the while cursing Kakashi for not doing his job as the boy's sensei. Something about the masked Jonin had always rubbed her the wrong way. Though to hear the pinkett openly admit it without making any excuse truly surprised her. With a quick flick of her wrist, the snake mistress shot the kunai she was playing with towards the pink-haired girl, causing the poor girl to gasp in horror before the kunai embedded itself into the tree just to the side of her, effectively cutting the ropes that bound her. Freeing her in the process. Though Sakura didn't have much time to enjoy the freedom as Anko was quickly upon her with another kunai in hand, pressed firmly against the pinkett's throat. Maybe there is hope for you yet, but mark my words, Pinky. The snake mistress hissed. Naruto-kun is someone extremely precious to me, and if I hear of you hurting him in any way, consequences be damned, they will never find your body. Understand? Sakura did the only thing she could do, and silently nodded. Good, now get out of here. Anko ordered, placing her kunai back into her holster. Exit is that way. Sakura didn't need to be told and quickly took off in the direction the snake mistress had pointed towards. Not wanting to risk the snake mistress's wrath or ire. Flashback no jutsu dispel. The Pinkett still shuddered at her run-in with the snake mistress, knowing full well that the purple-haired woman would make good on her threat. Shaking herself from her inner musings, Sakura took the chance to look up as she entered the training ground, and to her surprise found Naruto leaning back against one of the three large posts, reading what appeared to be a scroll of some kind. For some unknown reason to her, she felt happy, and almost excited to see him again. Good morning, Naruto. The Pinkett greeted a bit timidly, as a small part of her was nervous, having not seen him in a week. At first, the blonde didn't reply, causing the Pinkett to frown before he rolled up the scroll he had been reading and turned to meet her. Morning, Sakura. He greeted in return, though she still winced at the lack of chan at the end of her name. We've always wanted him to leave us alone and stop pestering us for dates, and now that he has it just feels like something is missing. Inner commented in a depressed tone. I know, brings a whole new meaning to the phrase, be careful what you wish for, doesn't it? I haven't seen you all week. She tentatively commented, earning a raised eyebrow from the blonde. I've been busy. Was all Naruto responded with, though it wasn't a lie. Kurama had set to work on the blonde's training right away, focusing on Fuinjutsu, knowing a particular seal that would give the boy some freedom to move around without worrying about the old monkey spying on him, as both knew the Hokage had kept watch over the boy through that crystal ball the old man kept in his office. Fortunately, the fox knew the one weakness the crystal ball had. It focused solely on a single chakra signature. In Naruto's case, it was the fox's. So Kurama had come up with an ingenious idea to throw off the old monkey. A simple combination between a blood clone and a chakra seal. It had taken a bit of trial and error for the blonde to get it down right, with the right mixture of chakra into the blood to form a fully functional and sentient copy of himself that was far more durable than a standard shadow clone. That being done, the Kyuubi had then pushed a large amount of his chakra into the blood clone to ensure the crystal ball would focus on the clone and not his actual vessel. Lastly, Naruto had placed the seal on himself, once he had perfected it. Which had a sort of chakra dampening effect, making it near impossible for sensors to focus in on his chakra signature unless he released far too much of it within a sensor's range. Fortunately, that was no issue during his later training towards the end of the week, as Naruto had secluded himself in the forest of death. Though he mentally shuddered when Anko would eventually find out that he had been training in her playground without her. I see. Was all Sakura replied with as she sat down on the other side of the post, awaiting the final two members of their team. Though she already knew Kakashi was going to be late again, as he always was. As silence hung between the two, Naruto had once again pulled out the scroll and began reading over it once more. It wasn't anything special, just a scroll about improved chakra control exercises and other things he could do to increase the control over his massive chakra reserve. As well as a few jutsus that he could add to his arsenal. Normally, he wouldn't have been able to gain access to such a scroll, as the library, just like countless other businesses within the village, would refuse him access. Despite it being illegal to refuse a Konoha shinobi service. However, a simple henge had solved that issue, and with his blood clone wandering around, it had been easy to fool the librarian and various other shops. Allowing the blonde to get what he required and to actually have some actual home-cooked meals. Not that he didn't like ramen, hell, he loved the stuff, but for the first time in 7 years, he was able to enjoy a dish of an old recipe his mother would make, thanks to Kurama's help of reciting the recipe to him. Though he knew he would have to make it up to Ayame for not coming by the ramen stand all week. No doubt worrying about him, with their past experiences of him being hunted down and attacked. This of course caused him to frown slightly. The blonde didn't like it when those who he held close were worried or in pain. We should stop by after training today. Kurama put in, sensing the thoughts his container had. You know that girl sees you as a little brother. Yeah. The blonde mentally agreed. Another half hour passed between them in silence while Naruto continued to read from his scroll. Meanwhile, Sakura would still glance at the blonde, curious as to what the scroll was about. However, before she could vocalize her question, the blonde quickly rolled the scroll up and stuffed it into one of his pouches, before leaning back against the post. What was that? She never got to finish her thought as Sasuke entered the training field. Smiling, she wished the raven-haired teen a good morning, only for the last Uchiha to merely scoff at her, prompting her to frown at his dismissal of her. Meanwhile, the Uchiha continued to not so silently complain about how the librarian had come over to his compound this morning and began pestering him about a scroll he had supposedly borrowed that needed to be returned by the end of the week. The pinkett had picked up on his grumbling and cast a sideways glance towards her blonde teammate in suspicion. You don't think that Naruto-kun changed into Sasuke to get that scroll? The pinkett mentally inquired. I think he did. He's been reading it all morning, and as soon as Sasuke arrived he put it away. Inner commented before seemingly pondering something else. What if this wasn't the first time Naruto-kun hung out with Sasuke? What do you mean? Think back to shortly after we passed the bell test, that moment on the park bench. Didn't Sasuke seem out of character then? Sakura thought about that for a few seconds. The more she thought about one of her most precious memories with the raven-haired boy, the more it began to change as she began to imagine Naruto sitting in Sasuke's place. Her eyes widening in realization. It wasn't Sasuke at all, it was Naruto-kun hanged as Sasuke. She replied to her inner self, who merely mentally nodded in agreement. You know me, it's considered polite to at least return a greeting. Naruto spoke up, breaking Sakura from her thoughts. Or didn't your mother ever teach you any manners? At least I had a mother, done. The Uchiha retorted with a smug look on his face, taking a stab at the blonde being an orphan, as it was well known that the boy's parents were killed during the Kyuubi attack 14 years ago. Sakura on the other hand frowned at the boy's taunt, causing her to want to chastise her crush of being such a jerk to try and use Naruto's lack of parents as a taunt, though stopped herself when she saw the blonde merely smirk in response, as if he knew something they didn't. However, one thought shot through her mind. Wait, was I really going to defend Naruto-kun from what Sasuke said? She asked herself, before her eyes widened in surprise. It appeared that her week-long search for her blonde teammate had acted as a sort of detox for her in regards to her obsession with the Uchiha, allowing her to finally compare the two boys on her team with a clear mind. We were. Inner replied, not commenting on her outer self referring to the blonde with the kun suffix and the lack of said suffix to the Uchiha's name for the past few minutes, since Sasuke had arrived at the training grounds. Though before both Sakuras could continue their mental conversation, Naruto broke them out of their thoughts. Really, that old taunt. I guess it is true about the great Uchiha clan. The blonde started with a lazy sigh. Can't create anything new, always have to steal it from somewhere else. This of course caused the raven-haired teen to seethe in anger, as the blonde in front of him had dared insult him and his clan. You're just jealous of my Sharingan's power. Sasuke defiantly stated. Yeah. The blonde scoffed before proceeding to flip off the Uchiha, which only served to infuriate the raven-haired boy even further. Copy this with your pink eye. Despite herself, Sakura couldn't help but giggle at Naruto's comeback, though had managed to cover it in a cough to not attract the attention of her two teammates. However, before things could escalate further, a puff of smoke erupted from the top of one of the training posts, revealing the masked Jonin reading his trademark orange book. Well, I see my lovely Genin is lively this morning. Kakashi commented in his usual lazy tone as he casually put away his book. What are we going to work on today, Kakashi-sensei? Sakura asked, looking up at the masked Jonin. Kakashi was silent for a moment as he took in his 3 students before him. He could see that Sasuke was about ready to attack Naruto for what the blonde had taunted the last Uchiha with. Though the masked Jonin was surprised to see that Naruto did not rise to the bait and instead had flipped it around on Sasuke. Which was slightly concerning, causing the Jonin to frown slightly. Normally Naruto would have lashed out at Sasuke, but instead he remained calm and had managed to get under Sasuke's skin. He thought to himself, before turning his attention back to the rest of Team 7. Today we will be working on individual exercises. Kakashi stated with an eye smile as he produced 3 scrolls. Naruto, I want you to practice the leaf-cutting exercise. Sakura, with your precise chakra control, I want you to focus on medical ninjutsus. Naruto said nothing as he took the scroll that was offered to him. Mentally scoffing at how badly the silver-haired man hid his agenda. Sure, if he was still under the effects of the seals, the blonde would have eaten it up that this was actual training. Now though, he saw it for exactly what it was. Stunting his growth to keep him from growing too strong, in case he needed to be put down. Guess I better struggle all day with this, just so he doesn't get suspicious. The blonde thought to himself, earning a mental nod from the large fox. What about me? Sasuke demanded, looking at the masked Jonin. I have some jutsus for you to work on. Kakashi replied with an eye smile. So you will come with me. Sakura, Naruto, stay here and work on your own exercises. Hi Kakashi-sensei. Both replied. Kakashi watched as Naruto made his way over to the tree line at the edge of the training field and began to gather leaves required for his exercise, while Sakura stayed near the training posts. Satisfied that the two had begun with their respective scrolls, the masked Jonin led the last Uchiha to the very far end of the training field, well away from the other 2. Can't wait to stick it to that bastard. Naruto thought to himself, imagining various ways to punish the silver-haired bastard. One of which included the same technique the man had used on the boy during the bell test. Barugaker. The sound of steel clashing against steel echoed across the massive training field as the 2 combatants repeatedly traded blows with one another at blinding speeds. Which was surprising considering the size of the blade the smaller of the 2 wielded effortlessly. Very good Xion-chan. The red-haired woman complimented her training partner. It seems you truly are worthy to wield Kubikiribocho. Thank you, Kushina-sensei. The black-haired teen panted, though didn't relax her stance. You never did tell me how you came across it. Kushina recalled as she charged forward with her own blade, bringing it down hard on the larger blade, causing the black-haired girl to grunt under the blow. After blocking the blow, Xion pivoted the blade and deflected the rest of the energy off to the left, giving her an opening to counter the red-haired woman. Seeing the opening, the black-haired girl charged forward only to suddenly halt her attack as her instincts told her to jump back. Wisely listening to them, she narrowly avoided a second attack from the red-haired woman, who had shifted her blade into a reverse grip position, using the momentum of the deflection to spin her around in the air. Skillfully, Xion landed a good 6 feet away from where she once was, her massive blade poised in a defensive position. Very good, Xion-chan, very good. Kushina praised as she moved into a relaxed stance, causing the black-haired girl to frown, seeing that their training session was coming to an end. I can still go on, Kushina-sensei. Xion protested, not wanting to stop training. She had to get stronger, to bring Naruto back home. However, her body betrayed her as it gave out, causing her to fall to one knee. Xion-chan. Kushina sighed as she walked over to the downed teen and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. No one wants my Sochi back more than me, believe me. But it won't do you or him any good if your body is broken because you don't know when to stop and allow your body to heal. Xion could only look down at the ground, tears forming in her eyes as she reflected on her soon-to-be mother-in-law's words. Nodding in understanding as she raised her head to meet the red-haired woman's eyes. By this time next month, Naruto-kun will be back home where he belongs, and we will have a large celebration for his return. Kushina smiled, bringing the black-haired teen into a hug, calming her down before the girl's emotions got too out of control. We will continue training in 2 days. In the meantime, rest and allow your body to recover. Hi, Kushina-sensei. Xion panted, rubbing away the tears that had stained her cheeks. Now, you never did tell me how you came to wield Kubikiribocho. Well, it was when we were leaving Wave Country. Xion began. Flashback no jutsu. Having bid their farewells to Tsunami and her family, the 5 girls had set off towards the docks to secure a boat back to their home village. Eager to tell Kushina the news that they had finally found where Naruto was and get him back. As they made their way across the small village, returning greetings to the various villagers, Xion had suddenly stopped and looked off in what appeared to be a random direction. You okay, Xion-chan? Kairi asked, seeing her friend and future sister-wife stop. Not saying anything, the short-haired girl took off in the direction she had been staring in, prompting the others to follow after her. Not understanding why their friend had suddenly taken off without a word. After only a handful of minutes running, they found their answer as Xion had stopped in front of 2 fresh graves. One of which had a broken mask, and the other a massive sword impaled into the ground. Naruto-kun dug these. Aqua stated as she approached the 2 graves, causing a wave of sadness to wash over the girls, followed by further spite towards the masked Jonin that was supposed to be their beloved sensei. That bastard Hitaki didn't even want to honor a fallen enemy. Morgiana spat the man's name in disgust, as a similar feeling was felt amongst the others, having learned that the masked Jonin had refused to help bury the 2 deceased foes, and had repeatedly given his disapproval towards Naruto for doing so. The mask must have belonged to Haku-san. Kairi stated as she knelt before the grave, offering a silent prayer to the fallen boy. And this must have been Zabuza's. Rory commented as she looked at the grave in front of the massive blade. Xion, however, remained silent as she stood before Zabuza's grave. Her eyes on the large sword that marked his gravestone. Folding her hands together, she bowed her head in respect to the fallen swordsman before slowly reaching out and grabbing hold of the handle of the massive blade. She had expected it to be heavy, considering its size. But to her surprise, it was as light as a feather, allowing her to swing it effortlessly. The rest of the girls watched as their short black-haired girl lifted the blade out of the ground and gave it a few good swings before holding it with both hands to admire its beauty. It looks like Kubikiribocho has recognized you as its new wielder, Xion-chan. Aqua commented. With their soon-to-be mother-in-law and acclaimed swordswoman herself, the 5 girls were well versed in the tales of the 7 swordsmen of the mist and the importance of their sentient blades, and how said blades chose its new wielder. I understand. Xion said with a smile on her face as she spoke to the blade, before turning and looking towards the other girls. Kubikiribocho has acknowledged me as its wielder, so that I can protect those dear to me. Securing the large blade to her back, Xion turned around once more and offered a final prayer of respect towards the swordsman before turning and walking away with the rest of the girls. Set on returning home to give the Baruchage the news about her son. Flashback no jutsu dispel. And that is what happened. Xion finished her tale while stroking the blade with her hand. I promised Kubikiribocho that I would use him to bring back Naruto-kun and protect our family and village. A bond with a legendary sword is an extraordinary thing, and I know you will do us proud, Xion-chan. Kushina smiled. Now head home and rest up. Hi, Kushina-sensei. The black-haired girl bowed before departing the training field. Konoha. Hours later. It had been a long and boring 6 hours of training for the young blonde as he continued to fake struggling with the leaf-cutting exercise. Though it seemed that the bastard of a sensei was pleased with his lack of progress, despite his words of disappointment in Naruto. Well, I must say all of you did well today. Kakashi gave his usual eye smile. Be sure to meet back here tomorrow at 7 a.m. Not waiting for a reply, the masked Jonin disappeared into another poof of smoke, leaving the three genin alone. Letting out a small sigh, the blonde genin stood up from where he was sitting, though still acting as if he was exhausted from the training exercises he was doing. Knowing full well Kakashi liked to disappear, only to spy on them from a distance. Naruto-ku. Naruto. Sakura called out, catching his attention as he raised an eyebrow in regards to her slip-up. Even Sasuke had shot the Pinkett a confused look, as the emo was expecting her to pester him for a date once more. What is it, Sakura? The blonde inquired, a little curious at his pink-haired teammates suddenly focusing on him. I was wondering if you would like to get some ramen. The Pinkett blushed as she realized it sounded like she was asking her blonde teammate out on a date. I was about to head there now. Naruto honestly replied. But when do you eat ramen? Aren't you on a diet? I've been eating there all week. Sakura answered. While I was looking for you. And I've kind of ended my diet. She continued. Except her offer kit. Kurama spoke up as he watched the interaction between the two. Kurama. The blonde mentally questioned. It's clear she's been looking for you all week since we detected her following you the day we returned. The fox explained. Notice how she hasn't even asked the Uchiha bastard for a date all afternoon, yet she is asking you to join her. I guess. The blonde relented, though still doubtful of the Pinkett's intentions. I know your crush on her was based off of her hair subconsciously reminding you of Morgiana-chan, but I can feel that she truly wants to be friends with you. Kurama continued, sensing the blonde's doubt. I say give her another chance, it may be nice to have an actual friend on the team while we are still here. Alright furball, you made your point. Love you too, brat. The fox retorted with a scoff, though smiled nonetheless. Alright Sakura, let's go. Naruto replied with a smile, causing the Pinkett to blush a little before nodding and joining the blonde. Leaving behind a dumbstruck Uchiha who had just witnessed what had happened and still didn't understand how one of his annoying fangirls had completely ignored him all day, and then asked the blonde dove out for a lunch date. Did that really just happen? He thought to himself. Currently the young blonde was regretting his love of ramen as a very upset ramen waitress glared down at him, causing him to shrink further into the stool he was seated in. While Sakura was attempting, and failing at holding a giggle into herself at the interaction between the two. The Pinkett knew that Ayame had been beyond worried for the blonde when he hadn't come by for an entire week. Immediately believing the worst had finally happened. Kit, you better apologize to her. Kurama barked from inside the boy's mind, clearly worried about what the girl would do to his host. Because I have never seen a woman that angry before, well, maybe your mother, but regardless. Apologize now. Do you have any idea of how worried I was for you, Naruto-kun? Ayame ground out as tears began to form in her eyes. I had feared that the worst had finally happened. Sorry Ayame-chan. The blonde squeaked out as the brunette girl continued to glare down at him. It's just that after my last mission, something happened that I really needed time to myself to figure out. You could have at least stopped by and let us know you were fine. The waitress continued to berate the young blonde. Even Sakura-san here has been looking for you all week. This of course caught the blonde's attention, to learn that the pink-haired girl had been looking for him all week. Prompting him to give her a questioning look, which elicited a slight blush from the Pinkett. As he took in her reaction, he noticed a small bandage on her right bicep, making him wonder what had happened. As far as he knew, she had done nothing that would have caused an injury during training. Ayame-san. Sakura interrupted the waitress, rant. Could we perhaps get something to eat before you continue to scare Naruto? Ayame looked between the blonde boy and the pink-haired girl for a moment before turning her attention back towards her little brother figure. Don't think you are off the hook yet for scaring us like that, she warned, before she seemingly flipped a switch and turned to Sakura with a cheerful expression. The usual, Sakura-san. Hi. The pink-it smiled. And I already know what you want, Naruto-kun. The ramen waitress stated before disappearing into the kitchen, leaving the two genin alone in an awkward silence as neither really knew what to say. So, I take it you changed as Sasuke to get the scroll you were reading this morning? Sakura tentatively asked, breaking the awkward silence. Yeah, he answered honestly with a slight shrug. Don't worry, I will return it before the due date so the team doesn't get in trouble. This wasn't the first time you hung out with Sasuke, was it? She inquired. No. The blonde sighed, knowing where this was going. On the bench, after the bell test. She began, blushing slightly. That was you, wasn't it? Ha, ha, busted Kit. Kurama laughed from the back of the boy's mind. Only took her how many weeks? Naruto responded in a sarcastic tone. Damn, time would have never said that to her. Better late than never, Kit. Yeah, that was me. He sighed, and waited for the pinkit to physically lash out, however it never came. Causing him to look towards his teammate in confusion. I figured, since Sasuke would never say something like that. She responded, looking down at the counter, a slight frown on her face as she came to a small realization that the boy she had a crush on for so long would never be the romantic she had dreamed of him being. Yet Naruto had, causing her to blush lightly, stealing a glance at the blonde next to her. Hey Kit, have you noticed something about her speech pattern? Kurama inquired, prompting the blonde to mentally an eyebrow in thought. No, what? Naruto replied to his older brother. She has dropped the kun suffix from the Uchiha brat's name. The fox pointed out, causing the blonde to slightly widen his eyes. And she has almost used it on you, twice now. You're right. He mentally responded. I suppose you want to know why I changed as Sasuke. It was more of a statement than a question, as he figured Sakura would be curious as to why he had decided to change as the brooding emo. Though he had hung out with other random civilians and shinobi as well throughout the week. No, I know why. The pinkit sighed. It's because a lot of the businesses in the village will either throw you out or charge you double or triple the standard price. How do you know this? Naruto asked, though he already knew the answer. 3 days ago, I got to know you. Sakura replied, rubbing her right bicep where her bandage was. Giving the blonde a clear idea of what had happened, causing his heart to sink into his stomach. After I couldn't find you, I decided to spend a day in your shoes. Flashback no jutsu. Sakura let out a long sigh as she leaned up against the side of a building. It had been 4 days since they had returned from Wave, and she had not seen any trace of her blonde teammate. To be honest, it was starting to get frustrating for the pink-haired girl. She was also growing more and more concerned, after listening to how Ayame and her father had found the boy every so often over the past few years. Shuddering slightly as she recalled some of the gruesome ways the father and daughter duo would find the poor boy, the ramen waitress had reluctantly divulged. I have an idea. She began, wondering how her inner self would react. What's that outer? Instead of replying, the pinkit ducked into an alleyway and ensured no one could see her before she made a ram seal. Immediately, a cloud of smoke obscured her body for a split second, before it dispersed, leaving a blonde-haired teen boy in a horrendous orange jumpsuit in its wake. You can't be serious. Exclaimed, immediately concerned for what her outer self had planned. I am. Sakura, now changed as Naruto mentally replied. If I can't find him to talk to him, then I can walk a day in his shoes and get a look into his daily life. But you heard what the villagers said about Naruto. What if they think you or him and attack you? That's the idea. I want them to think I am Naruto. Sakura frowned as she looked over her henge. As far as she could tell, it was spot on. Just be careful, outer. Inner stated in concern, still not liking this plan. Especially after hearing from the ramen waitress what had happened to the poor boy in the past. You heard what Ayame-san had said about how she and her father had found him before. I know Inner, I know. Sakura sighed before taking a deep breath and left the alleyway, placing his hands in his jacket. Knowing that she couldn't accurately portray his mannerisms nor imitate his voice, the Pinkett had opted to merely stay quiet and walk around. The change was almost immediate as soon as she stepped back onto the main street. All the glares directed at her made her want to shrink back into the alleyway and hide, but she forced herself to carry on. She needed to experience this so she could better understand Naruto. As she continued to walk through the street, she saw people whispering to one another while gesturing towards her. Mothers pulling their kids away from her, telling them not to go anywhere near the demon child. As the day wore on, Naruto wandered through the streets and various shops. Getting kicked out of most, and if they did let him in, the owner would charge him double or triple the asking price, stating it was a demon tax, causing the Pinkett to frown. She did her best not to cause further trouble for her blonde teammate, though had still managed to get him banned from a few of the places that had allowed her in, making her feel slightly guilty. Hours later, slowly, the sun began to set, basking the village in an orange glow as the Pinkett still changed as the young blonde made her way back towards the alleyway she had started in. Lost in thought of everything she had experienced throughout the day. To think, he lives this every day. Inner commented with a solemn understanding of just how much pain and hate the blonde boy has to contend with on a daily basis. How does he do it? The Pinkett wandered absent-mindedly. After the first few minutes I wanted to run and hide away from it all. However, her musing was cut short as a kunai grazed her right arm, eliciting a yelp in pain from the changed cherry blossom. Turning, she saw a small mob of people gathering behind her with some Chunin-level shinobi among them. There he is. One from the mob cried out. Get him. Kill him. Avenge the Yondaime. Shit. She mentally screamed out as she broke out in a run, avoiding additional projectiles that were being thrown in her direction. As the minutes ticked by, she was becoming more and more tired. Not having the same stamina as her two teammates, and as she got more and more tired, the projectiles the mob were throwing at her got closer and closer. Having nearly hit her countless times. I need a way out. Sakura thought in a panic as she looked around for anything she could use. Seeing a tree just ahead, she quickly came up with a plan. Taking a cautious look behind her, she began to time it. As soon as one of the Chunin in the crowd threw one of their kunai, she substituted herself with a log and disappeared into the tree, quickly dropping her henge. Damn it! A yell could be heard from one of the nameless pursuers. The demon got away again. Watching as the mob slowly began to disperse, upset that their prey had eluded them once more as they grumbled to one another about how they would get the demon brat next time. Letting out a sigh of relief, Sakura dropped down from the tree and lingered for a moment before leaving in the opposite direction that a majority of the mob left in. Unaware of a pair of blue eyes that had been watching her. Flashback no jutsu dispel. What you did was incredibly reckless, Sakura. The blonde frowned after the Pinkett had finished her explanation. Sakura was about to retort before he held up his hand to prevent her from saying anything. But, I thank you for actually trying to understand my life. You're welcome. She replied softly. Just promise me you will never do that again. He requested with a serious look in his eyes that she had never seen before, prompting her to simply nod her head in agreement. If you really want to come talk to me, my apartment is in the red light district, top floor, all the way to the end. Just look for the graffiti. Sakura frowned at this, but nodded nonetheless. Becoming further disappointed in the villagers' actions. Weighing her options, she decided to ask the question that was foremost on her mind ever since his comment in Wave. Naruto, why do the villagers hate you? She asked bluntly. Maybe they don't like my pranks. He offhandedly commented, earning another frown from the Pinkett. He's hiding something. Inner commented with a mental frown, earning a nod from her outer self. Your pranks aren't that bad to get the entire village to hate you. She commented, causing him to let out a soft sigh. Sorry, but there is a law surrounding it. He answered in a low tone. To reveal it would be a death sentence for you. Nodding slightly, she decided to back off from the subject for now. Though his answer only got her more curious as to what it could be that required such a law to surround her blonde teammate. Though before she could reply to the blonde, Ayame returned with their bowls and placed them in front of the two genins. Here you go. The brunette happily stated. Thank you. Both responded as they began to dig into their respective bowls. The two ate in silence as Ayame went to tend to other customers that began to filter into the ramen stand. After they finished, the two paid for their meals and bid the brunette waitress farewell, with Naruto promising that he would not disappear like that again. You should leave her a hint. Kurama commented as the two silently walked away from the ramen stand. Like your birthday. You sure? Naruto inquired with a mental frown. I thought the whole reason for giving her a second chance was to have a friend on the team while I am still here. If she learns the truth, she could. If she is smart enough to figure it out, she is smart enough to know we are two different entities. The fox replied, cutting off the blonde. I am not saying reveal our close friendship or anything. I guess I will see you tomorrow. Sakura asked, breaking the blonde from his inner conversation with his tenant. Yeah. He nodded, turning to leave before he paused. By the way, my birthday is October 10th. This caught the Pinkett off guard as she watched the blonde walk away from her. Frowning, she pondered why he would give her such a mundane bit of information about him as she walked in the direction of her home. Why did he tell us his birthday? Inner inquired. It's not like it's coming up soon or anything. No, it has to mean something. Sakura mentally replied. Why does that date sound familiar? Frowning further, she made a detour towards the village library. She knew there was a reason that Naruto had told her his birthday, and it wasn't because he was expecting a birthday party when it rolled around. Something in her gut told her that it had something to do with why the villagers hated him. Hokage Tower. Anything new to report? The elder village leader asked as the silver-haired Jonin entered his office, reading his usual orange book. He is still more subdued since after the mission, not as loud as he used to be. Kakashi replied lazily, not looking up from his book. He still struggles on chakra control exercises. He was unable to complete the leaf-cutting exercise today. That is good, Hiruzen stated as he took a puff from his pipe. We don't want our weapon to get too strong before he is mentally broken and completely loyal to this village. Kakashi merely nodded in agreement. He knew full well the damage the demon could cause if he gained too much power before he was mentally conditioned to be the village's weapon. Especially if he decided to retaliate against the villagers' attacks on him. Any other developments with your team? Since Sasuke has unlocked his Sharingan finally, I've begun to train him to use it. Hopefully within a few months I can start training him on how to use it to subdue other Jinchuriki or Biju. Good, good. Hiruzen nodded in approval. Shame Itachi had to massacre the entire clan. We could use more matured Sharingan users to keep the weapon subdued. Has Sasuke shown any interest in reviving his clan? No, Hokage-sama. The masked Jonin sighed, closing his book. His sole goal right now is to avenge his clan. The elder man frowned at that. He had hoped the last Uchiha in the village would have at least a few illegitimate kids running around with the sheer amount of fangirls the boy had. A few of which had blatantly stated they wanted to bear his children. Just make sure he is ready. The last thing we need is for the boy to die before he can sire any children. The Hokage stated. Anything else? There has been a small development with the Haruno girl. And that is, since the incident in Wave, she has been consciously seeking out the Jinchuriki. Do you suspect they are romantically involved? The elder man asked. It was no secret that the blonde Jinchuriki had a crush on the pink-haired girl. If the two were romantically involved with one another, he would have to end it, possibly by disposing of the girl as she was more expandable than the weapon. However, the more he thought about it, the more he considered how this development could work in his favor. No. Kakashi replied. It seems his crush on her has died in Wave. Her goal, however, is to prove to him that there are others who would care if something were to happen to him. Should I intervene? No. Hiruzen answered. Allow her to continue. We could use this to our advantage. How so, Hokage-sama? If they were to actually form an emotional bond with one another, we can exploit that bond to speed up the process of breaking his mind. Hiruzen grinned darkly. I want you to start pairing them together on assignments. Subtly nudge them closer together, but don't force it. And if they do become romantic, I will allow it for a time, to ensure that bond is set. The Hokage replied, the grin still on his face as he imagined how his current plan would turn out in the village's favor. Once the bond is set, we will remove the Haruno girl, allowing the weapon's mind to completely break. Kakashi frowned slightly, not wanting to toss away a potential kunoichi for the village, but it was for the greater good of the village. So it was an acceptable sacrifice to ensure Konoha took its rightful place as the strongest of all the villages. It will be done, Hokage-sama. He bowed before departing the office, leaving the village leader alone with his thoughts. A malicious grin on his face, the elder village leader took out a single black notebook from a safe under his desk and began to detail his current plan involving the young pink-haired girl, and the village weapon. It was risky to have all of the village's dark secrets he had ordered in a single place, but the elder man knew there was a chance he would not see his plan to fruition, and it would fall to his successor to see it to the end. And this book would guide them along the path to make Konoha the greatest of all the hidden villages. Once his successor fully believed in the will of fire. Forgive me, Sakura Haruno. Hiruzen thought to himself. But your sacrifice is necessary for the greater good of Konoha when the time is right. The next morning, 7 a.m. In a word, Sakura was tired. She had stayed up well into the early morning hours combing over the scrolls, books, and various other newspaper clippings that she had borrowed from the village library. All relating to the date Naruto had given her, and what she had discovered from the newspaper clippings had made her heart sink. The same night her blonde teammate was born, the Kyuubi had attacked the village. She knew the story well enough of how the Yondaime Hokage had valiantly fought against the massive demon fox and had killed it at the cost of his own life to preserve Konoha and its people. However, she had found irregularities between the newspaper clippings and the lessons from the academy. Realizing they didn't match up. There was also the fact that the villagers had called her, when she was hanged as Naruto, a demon or a demon child. That was what had prompted her to look up scrolls about Biju. Learning that they were constructs made purely of chakra and thus, unable to be killed by any known means. Even if the Biju would sustain enough damage to disperse, it would only reform some time later. As she further researched, she came across a bit of information that made her body run cold. The only way to defeat a Biju was to seal it within a newborn child that had yet to form any chakra coils. It was then that everything clicked together. Naruto had the Kyuubi sealed within him. With that new knowledge, the Pinkett had quickly scrounged for any information regarding Jinchuriki. Learning that with the exception of Kumogakure and Barugakure, nearly every hidden village that had one had treated their Jinchuriki as if they were worse than trash, and Konoha was no different. The reason why the villages would do this was just as horrifying. They wanted to break the Jinchuriki's mind and strip them of their humanity, turning them into mindless weapons to be pointed at the village's enemies. However, there was one bit of information that the Pinkett had come across that had frozen her very soul. A discovery made by pure accident. Setting an empty glass on top of one of the newspaper articles that one brave or stupid reporter had managed to snap an up-close picture of the rampaging Kyuubi, the Pinkett had seen something odd with the beast's eyes. While it was difficult to make out through the pixelated photo, she could make out the markings of an advanced Sharingan eye. This accidental discovery had sent the Pinkett on another round of research, looking up scrolls and such about the Sharingan eye and its advanced forms. From what she had learned of Biju themselves, she knew that the chakra beasts themselves held no dojutsu. So upon reading up on the various forms of the Sharingan that the library had, she had learned that the Mangekyo Sharingan is capable of casting powerful genjutsu over its target that would allow the wielder to control their victim. Furthermore, she had learned that one such Mangekyo wielder by the name of Madara Uchiha was capable of asserting complete control over the Kyuubi. Piecing the pieces together, she had come to the conclusion, as unlikely as it was, that the Kyuubi had been forced to attack the village that night. Though for what reasons, she didn't know. Letting out a sigh, she leaned her head back on the training post. Desperately wanting to close her eyes and fall asleep, but resisted all the same. She wanted to, needed to talk to Naruto about what she had learned. Praying to Kami that the blonde would arrive before the rest of her team. Fortunately, her prayers were answered as she heard the sound of footsteps approaching her locations. Looking up, she saw her blonde teammate. Standing up, she brushed the dirt off her clothing before turning to greet the blonde. "Morning, Sakura." Naruto greeted me. "Did you sleep?" He never got to finish as the Pinkett wrapped him in a hug, burying her face into the crook of his neck. Catching the young blonde by surprise by such an action. Though, he knew why. "You found out, didn't you?" he asked, earning a nod from the girl as she broke away from the hug. "I did some research last night about the date you gave me," she replied as she took a step back, looking down at the ground as she tried to form how she was going to approach the subject. "I know now why most of the villagers hate you." "I see," was all Naruto answered with. "But I don't think differently of you." Sakura quickly reassured me. "I know." He chuckled. "Otherwise you wouldn't have hugged me like you did, Sakura-chan." Upon hearing the chan suffix added to her name once more, the Pinkett's heart fluttered with joy. A few weeks ago, she would argue as to why she felt this way, but now, she knew exactly why. She missed the blonde referring to her in such an affectionate manner. Her week-long search for the blonde, her meeting with the crazy snake lady, and her experience living a day as him had opened her eyes and allowed her to view the blonde teen in a new light. There was something else, she stated, her voice low as if she didn't want anyone else to hear what she was about to say. This of course caught the blonde's attention as he looked to her, waiting for her to continue. "What is it?" I think, it was controlled that night." She all but whispered, putting an emphasis on the word, it, so Naruto knew exactly who she was talking about. So friends, this was episode 1 of this exciting multiverse adventure. If you enjoyed it and want episode 2 soon, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Also comment down your thoughts. What do you think Naruto's first recovered memory will reveal, and who do you think is hunting him? I'll see you in the next episode.